Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
I nearly dropped my phone when my sister laughed and said, "Sold. I just got 2.4 million for that old beach house. Don't worry. I'll use your share to buy a yacht." Then she hung up. She thought she had won. But what she didn't know was that Grandma had left me a secret that would change everything. The phone rang earlier than usual, jarring me out of a deep sleep. I blinked at the screen, my sister's name glowing bright. We hadn't spoken in months, and when we did, it was never for a good reason. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. "What do you want?" I muttered, still half asleep. Her voice came through the line, annoyingly chipper. "Good morning to you, too. Guess what?" I sighed, rubbing my face. "What?" "It's done." I sat up, already on edge. "What's done?" "The beach house. The one Grandma left us," she said, as if I were slow. "I just got an offer I couldn't refuse. 2.4 million. In cash. Can you believe it?" My breath caught in my throat. "Wait, you sold it?" I swung my legs over the side of the bed, already feeling the blood rush to my head. "You can't sell it without my signature." She laughed. A light, mocking sound. "Oh, you never actually read the will, did you?" My jaw clenched. "What are you talking about?" "I got the house," she said, dragging out the words. "You got, well, nothing really." I gripped my phone so hard my fingers ached. "That's not possible. We both inherited it." "No, just me." Her tone was gleeful, like she was enjoying this. I double-checked with the lawyers before I signed the papers. "It's all mine. And don't worry, I'll use your share to buy something nice. Maybe a yacht." Then she hung up, just like that. For a long moment, I just sat there, my mind racing. She had to be lying. She had to be. But deep down, something told me she wasn't. That pure, unfiltered smugness in her voice was the same tone she had used as kids whenever she got away with something. Stealing my birthday money, taking credit for my ideas, charming her way out of trouble while I was left to deal with the consequences. But this was different. This wasn't some childhood prank or petty jealousy. This was real. I took a slow breath and forced myself to think. I had read the will. I remembered sitting in that stuffy lawyer's office, the scent of old paper and stale coffee thick in the air. My sister had sat across from me, feigning sadness, but I knew better. She had never been close to Grandma. Not like I was. The lawyer had read through the documents, explaining the details. The house was left to us both. I was sure of it. So how had she managed to sell it without me? Something wasn't adding up. And then I remembered Grandma's words, whispered to me months before she passed. "If anything ever happens to me, don't forget to check the attic." At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. I had assumed it was just one of her quirks, a random thought spoken aloud. But now, as I sat in bed with my pulse pounding in my ears, I realized she had been trying to tell me something important. I jumped out of bed, threw on the first clothes I could find, and grabbed my keys. I needed to see the house before the sale was finalized. The drive to the beach house felt longer than usual, the highway stretching endlessly ahead of me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, my mind racing through every possibility. Had my sister forged documents? Lied to the lawyers? Or was there something in the will that I had missed? I pulled up to the house, just as the sun was rising over the ocean, casting a golden glow over the weathered siding and salt-streaked windows. It looked the same as always, old but sturdy, its foundation rooted in memories. I stepped out of the car and took a deep breath. The air smelled like the sea, like childhood summer spent running barefoot through the sand, eating melted popsicles on the porch with Grandma. I pushed the front door open. It creaked like it always had, a familiar welcome. The house was empty now, the furniture covered with dust and white sheets. It felt eerie, almost like Grandma's spirit still lingered, watching over the place. I made my way upstairs, my heart hammering with each step. The attic door was at the end of the hall, tucked away behind a heavy wooden panel. I hesitated. What was I expecting to find? A second will? A deed? Some hidden proof that the house belonged to me, too? I pushed the thoughts away and forced the door open. Dust swirled in the air as I stepped inside. The attic was just as I remembered, cramped, filled with old trunks and forgotten treasures. I ran my fingers along the edge of a wooden chest, the scent of aged paper and cedar filling my nose. Then my eyes landed on something unusual, a small metal box hidden behind a loose wooden panel. My breath caught. This wasn't here before, or if it was, I had never noticed it. I knelt down, heart pounding, and pulled it free. It was heavier than it looked, the metal cool beneath my fingers. I flipped open the rusted latch, and inside, nestled among yellowed papers, was an old key and a letter. My name was scrawled across the front in my grandmother's handwriting. With shaking hands, I unfolded it and began to read. My dear, if you're reading this, it means things didn't go as I hoped. The house was never the true inheritance. The real treasure is buried where the tides meet the old oak tree. I trust you to find it and to know what to do. I reread the words, my pulse hammering in my ears. Buried treasure? The old oak tree? Memories crashed over me. Playing beneath that tree as a kid, its massive roots twisting into the sand like gnarled fingers. Grandma had always loved that spot, but I had never thought there was something hidden there. I clenched the key in my fist. My sister had taken the house. She had laughed in my face, rubbed my loss in like salt in a wound. But what she didn't know, what she never would have thought to look for, was that Grandma had left me something far more valuable. And I was about to find out exactly what it was. The attic felt heavier than it should have, like the air itself carried the weight of forgotten secrets. Dust swirled in the thin light streaming through the single window, catching in my throat as I stood there, gripping the small brass key and the letter in my trembling hands. I read Grandma's words again, my eyes scanning over them as if the meaning would somehow change. The house was never the true inheritance. The real treasure is buried where the tides meet the old oak tree. The old oak tree. I knew exactly where that was. It stood alone at the edge of the cliffs, gnarled and weathered by salt and time. I had played there as a child, climbed its thick branches while Grandma sat beneath it, telling me stories about the sea and the land. But treasure? Had she been speaking literally? My heart pounded as I carefully folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. The key felt warm now, as if it had absorbed the heat of my palm. Whatever it unlocked, whatever Grandma had hidden, was something my sister had completely overlooked. And I had no doubt that was intentional. I took one last look around the attic. The walls were lined with old trunks, forgotten furniture, and memories sealed in dust. It felt like Grandma was still here, watching, waiting for me to find what she had left behind. I swallowed hard, then turned and made my way down the creaking steps. The house was eerily silent, the weight of its empty rooms pressing in around me. I walked through the hallway, my fingers skimming the faded wallpaper. It was strange how, even stripped of furniture, the house still held its presence. My sister had probably never stopped to feel that. To her, it was just a building, something to sell and forget. But to me, this place was more than wood and stone. It was history. It was home. And I wasn't about to let my sister erase that without knowing the truth first. I stepped outside, the salty breeze hitting my face as I headed toward the cliffs. The path to the old oak tree was overgrown, weeds and sea grass brushing against my legs as I pushed forward. The closer I got, the more my stomach twisted. Was I actually about to find something? Or had Grandma simply left behind an old memory, some trinket from her past that meant nothing now? But deep down, I knew this wasn't just a sentimental scavenger hunt. Grandma was deliberate. She had planned this, and that meant whatever was buried under that tree was important enough to keep hidden, even from her own family. The tree came into view, its massive roots twisting deep into the earth. The ground sloped downward here, the tide rolling in just beyond the edge of the cliff. The spot had always been a little eerie to me as a child. I could still hear Grandma's voice warning me not to get too close to the edge. Some things belong to the ocean, my dear, and some things the ocean can never have. I swallowed and dropped to my knees, my fingers digging into the damp earth. The soil was compact, but I could tell it had been disturbed before, years, maybe decades ago. I worked fast, my hands clawing through layers of dirt and sand. My heart pounded with every handful I pulled away. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, heat prickling the back of my neck, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Then, thunk. My fingers scraped against something solid. Metal. My breath hitched. I dug faster, pushing away the remaining dirt until the object was fully uncovered. It was a rusted metal box, larger than the one in the attic, its surface worn but still intact. My hands shook as I reached into my pocket, pulling out the key. I hesitated. Then, taking a deep breath, I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the lid creaked open, and what I saw inside made my entire world tilt on its axis. Stacks of old documents, carefully folded and wrapped in faded cloth. The papers were thick, the edges yellowed with age. I reached for the top one, my hands trembling as I unfolded it. It was a deed. My eyes darted across the words, scanning faster than my brain could process. Then it hit me. The beach house, the one my sister had just sold? It was only a tiny fraction of what Grandma had actually owned. My breath came in sharp gasps as I flipped through the rest of the documents. Hundreds of acres, miles of coastal land, properties stretching further than I had ever imagined. And every single one of them had been left to me. Not to my sister. To me. I sat back on my heels, the papers shaking in my hands. This land, this fortune, had been hidden away, locked beneath the roots of an old oak tree, waiting for the right person to find it. Grandma had known my sister's greed. She had known that if the land had been listed in plain sight, my sister would have done everything to take it. So she had hidden it. She had trusted me to uncover it. A slow, stunned laugh bubbled from my throat. My sister had fought tooth and nail to steal that house, believing she had outplayed me. She had mocked me, gloated, rubbed my supposed loss in my face. And yet, she had no idea that what she had sold was barely worth a fraction of what I now owned. I let out a slow breath, staring out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the cliffs below. Grandma had always said that some things belong to the ocean. But this was mine. And my sister? She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The documents in my hands felt heavier than any piece of paper should. The wind whipped through the cliffs, pulling at the yellowed pages, but I held on tight, my fingers pressing into the edges as if letting go would make this all disappear. My mind raced as I read through each one, my breath catching at the sheer scale of what Grandma had hidden. The land stretched for miles. Coastal properties, untouched forested acres, even plots near the town that had long been considered valuable real estate. And it was all mine. I let out a shaky laugh, the absurdity of the situation crashing over me. My sister had spent months scheming to take the house, bribing lawyers, manipulating paperwork, probably forging my signature, thinking she had won. And yet, she had unknowingly left behind something worth 10 times more. Grandma had outplayed her from the start. I carefully folded the documents back into the box, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. This changed everything. But the more I thought about it, the more questions started to form. If my grandmother had owned all this land, why had she kept it a secret? Why hadn't she ever told me? And most importantly, what was I supposed to do now? I exhaled sharply and shoved the key back into my pocket, my grip tightening around the rusted box. I needed to be smart. My sister would come after me the second she found out about this. She had no problem lying and cheating to get her way, and now that she had blown through most of her money, she'd be desperate. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to me. The law office smelled like old paper and fresh coffee, the scent clinging to the polished wooden walls. I had barely slept the night before, my mind running through every possibility, every worst-case scenario. By morning, I had made my decision. I needed legal proof, something solid that my sister couldn't manipulate. Mr. Langley, my grandmother's lawyer, was already waiting for me when I arrived. He was an older man, with thin-rimmed glasses and a sharp gaze that missed nothing. He had handled Grandma's affairs for years, and if anyone knew the truth, it was him. He gestured for me to sit, steepling his fingers as he studied me. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice calm. I frowned. "You knew?" He nodded. "Your grandmother told me she had left something for you to find, though she didn't tell me exactly what. Just that when the time was right, you'd come looking." I swallowed hard, then reached into my bag and pulled out the documents, spreading them across his desk. "Is this real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Did my grandmother really own all of this? Mr. Langley took his time reading through the papers, his sharp eyes scanning every detail. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "Yes," he said simply. "These deeds are authentic. This land belonged to your grandmother." I exhaled, relief and disbelief crashing over me at the same time. Then why didn't she ever say anything? Why wasn't this included in the will? Mr. Langley leaned back, his gaze unreadable. "Because she didn't trust your sister." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "She knew how your sister was," he continued. "She knew that if everything was listed in the will, there would be nothing stopping her from contesting it, from dragging you through years of legal battles. So she did something brilliant." He tapped the papers lightly. "She removed these properties from her official estate long before her passing. Which means, legally speaking, these lands were never part of the inheritance at all." I blinked. "So, what does that mean for me?" "It means," he said with a small smile, "that your sister has no claim to them. At all." My head spun. I had walked into this office expecting complications, legal loopholes, something that would make this harder. But now it was clear. Grandma had planned for this. She had made sure my sister could never touch what truly mattered. A slow, incredulous laugh slipped from my lips. She had known. She had always known. I sat back, my fingers tightening around the armrests of my chair. So, if I want to sell? I asked cautiously. That's entirely up to you, Mr. Langley said. You can sell, develop, or hold on to it for as long as you want. But given the location, the value will only go up. You're sitting on a gold mine. I swallowed hard, trying to process the weight of it all. My sister had taken everything from me, or so she thought. She had laughed, gloated, hung up the phone thinking she had won. But she had no idea, and I wasn't about to tell her. Not yet. The next few days passed in a blur. I made copies of everything, secured legal protection, and started meeting with real estate experts. Every conversation, every evaluation confirmed the same thing. This land was worth millions. Meanwhile, my sister was busy parading around her new yacht, posting pictures online, bragging about her perfect deal. I watched in silence. She was burning through the money fast, throwing parties, taking lavish vacations. She had no idea that I had secured something far more valuable. And then, just as I predicted, her problems began. It started with a frantic voicemail. Hey, so listen, I need to talk to you. My sister's voice came through, forced and sweet. I might have been a little harsh on the phone, but look, I want to make things right. Call me back. Okay. I didn't. 2 days later, another message. Okay, so you're ignoring me. Real mature. Look, I just need a small favor. Just a loan, really. Nothing crazy. A pause. I mean, after all, we're family, right? I smiled, leaning back in my chair as I stared out at the ocean. This was exactly what Grandma had known would happen. And I wasn't done yet. It took exactly 3 days before my sister caved. At first, she kept up the act, the cold silence, the calculated social media posts that hinted she was still thriving. But I knew better. The cracks were already forming. The yacht she had once bragged about, listed for sale. The luxury handbags and designer outfits she flaunted, mysteriously disappearing from her pictures. And then, on the 4th day, I got the text. We need to talk. Now. I let her sit with her panic for a few hours before responding. Busy. Try again later. Because unlike her, I wasn't desperate. When I finally agreed to meet, I made sure it was on my terms. A high-end cafe by the water, the kind where she used to take smug Instagram selfies before she started hemorrhaging cash. She was already waiting when I arrived, dressed in her usual expensive but now slightly dated designer outfit. But the moment I sat down, I saw it. The exhaustion, the stress lines around her mouth, the barely contained rage simmering beneath the surface. She was unraveling. I took my time stirring my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. She was the first to break. I know you did something. I smiled, taking a sip. Good to see you too. Her nails tapped against the table. Cut the crap. I talked to a lawyer. They said Grandma did own more land. Her lips pressed into a tight line. Land she left to you. I feigned innocence. Huh, you don't say. Her jaw clenched. How much? I tilted my head. How much what? Her voice lowered, sharp and furious. How much is it worth? I could have drawn it out longer, could have made her sweat, but watching her lose it in real time was too entertaining to resist. So I leaned in slightly, meeting her gaze with a satisfied smirk. Over $20 million. She went completely still. Her fingers tightened around her coffee cup, so hard I thought it might shatter. You're lying, she whispered. I shrugged, taking another casual sip. Go ahead. Look it up. Public records should be updated by now. Her phone was in her hand in seconds, her fingers shaking as she pulled up the county records. I watched as her face drained of color. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she was seeing. $20 million. More than 10 times what she had sold the house for. I could practically hear her world collapsing. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. You knew this whole time. I set my cup down gently. I knew the second you called me, laughing about how you had screwed me over. I gave her a pointed look. That's why I let you. That's why I didn't stop you. Her breathing was erratic, her carefully constructed image shattering before my eyes. That's not fair, she choked out. I cut her off. No. What's not fair is you stealing from me. Lying, manipulating, forging documents to cut me out. That's not fair. She shook her head, her eyes glassy with something between fury and desperation. I didn't. Save it, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. You thought you had won. You laughed in my face, hung up the phone, and went shopping for a yacht. And now look at you. She flinched. I leaned back, stretching my arms. So, what exactly did you want to talk about? Her lips parted like she was about to spew another excuse, another lie. But then, she did something that truly shocked me. She swallowed her pride. Help me, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. Help you? She nodded quickly, her mask finally slipping away. I made a mistake, okay? I didn't know. If I had known about the land, I never would have. I laughed. That's your excuse? If you had known, you wouldn't have stabbed me in the back. She was flustered now, scrambling to recover. No, I'm in a bad place. I lost a lot of money on investments. I smirked. Oh, investments? Or blowing it all on parties, designer crap, and people who don't actually care about you. She stiffened. I let out a mock sigh. If only you had a share of a $20 million estate. Huh? Her eyes flashed with raw envy. And that's when I knew she wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just terrified of losing. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. Look, I know we've had our issues, but we're family. We should be working together, not fighting. Think about what we could do with that money together. I chuckled, shaking my head. See, that's the difference between you and me. I don't need to work together to be successful. I don't need to steal from people to get ahead. And I sure as hell don't need you. Her face twisted, her desperation flickering into anger. You think you're better than me? She hissed. I tilted my head. No, I know I am. Silence. The rage in her eyes was delicious. She was losing. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table. You had your shot. You chose greed. You chose yourself. I smirked. So now, I choose myself. She shot up from her seat. You'll regret this. I grinned. No, you will. And then I walked away, leaving her alone, broke and powerless, just like she had left me. By the end of the week, her yacht was repossessed. By the end of the month, she was forced to sell her designer bags, her car, even her apartment. And by the end of the year, she was living in a rundown rental, barely scraping by. Meanwhile, I was building something real. I had invested in properties, expanded my assets, secured my future. I had won. And my sister? She had learned the most important lesson of all. Karma always comes back. The news spread faster than I expected. It started as whispers, old friends mentioning that my sister was having a rough time, acquaintances exchanging knowing looks when her name came up. And then before long, it was out in the open. The yacht? Gone. The luxury lifestyle? Gone. The fake friends who had stuck around when the money was flowing? Long gone. And me? I was thriving. I had just finalized my biggest land deal yet, a multi-million-dollar contract that would keep me financially secure for generations. While my sister had burned through her stolen fortune, I had been building something real. I could have ignored her, could have let her fade into the background, a lesson in what happens when greed takes over. But she wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It happened at an investor's event, a high-end affair at a sleek rooftop lounge overlooking the ocean. I had been invited as a guest of honor, one of the biggest landowners in the region, a title that still felt surreal. I was mid-conversation with a real estate mogul when I felt it, a shift in the air, a sudden, unwanted presence. And then, her voice. Wow, look at you. I turned slowly, my stomach tightening as I took her in. My sister stood just a few feet away, dressed in something expensive, but not new. She looked good, but not effortlessly put together like before. And more than that, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Desperation. I sighed, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Shouldn't you be somewhere not invited? She forced a laugh, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was hoping someone important was watching. I have connections too, you know. I took a slow sip, letting her stew in the silence. She shifted uncomfortably. You're really not going to talk to me? I arched a brow. What could we possibly have to talk about? She inhaled sharply. I'll admit, things haven't been great for me. But you have to see that this is unfair. I nearly choked on my drink. Unfair? She nodded, stepping closer. You have more than enough. You don't even need all of it. But me? I've lost everything. Her voice wavered slightly. I just need a second chance. I stared at her. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. The moment she was forced to look at me as the one in control. For the first time in her life, she needed me. And I wasn't about to let her forget it. I tilted my head. Funny, I needed a second chance once too. She swallowed hard. You took everything from me? I cut in, my voice calm but firm. You laughed about it. Mocked me. Told me I got nothing. Remember that? She flinched. You sold the house behind my back, I continued. You thought you had won. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. And now, you're here, begging, her hands curled into fists. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I set my drink down, leveling her with a cool stare. You don't get to manipulate your way out of this one. Her nostrils flared. So, you're just going to let me suffer? I smirked. I'm going to let karma do its job. Silence. A thick, humiliating silence that wrapped around her like chains. Her breath came in short, shallow bursts. She knew. She knew this was the end of her game. Finally, with a sharp inhale, she turned on her heel and walked away. Not gracefully. Not like the composed, powerful woman she once pretended to be. No. She walked away like someone who had just lost everything. And I turned back to my conversation, my heart light, my victory absolute. Because I had won. And my sister? She had finally learned what it meant to lose. I should have known my sister wouldn't go down quietly. Losing the money, the house, and her reputation should have been enough. For anyone else, it would have been. But my sister? She had built her entire life around the idea that she was the smartest person in the room, that she could manipulate her way out of anything. And when she realized begging wouldn't work, she turned to the only other weapon she had left. The legal notice arrived on a crisp, white envelope, delivered straight to my lawyer's office. I was in the middle of a property deal when Mr. Langley called, his tone laced with amusement. Well, he said, your sister is nothing if not persistent. I sighed, rubbing my temple. What now? She's trying to contest the inheritance, he said. Claims there was foul play. That you somehow manipulated your grandmother into leaving everything to you. I blinked, then let out a short, sharp laugh. She's kidding, right? Oh, I wish she was, Langley said, chuckling. But no, she's going for the legal intimidation route. Claims she has proof you tampered with the will. I snorted. Proof? What proof? None. But she's hoping you'll settle just to make her go away. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. It was so classic. She had nothing, and she knew it. But she was desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. Should I be worried? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Langley sighed. Not in the slightest. Your grandmother was meticulous. The land wasn't even part of the will. It was transferred legally long before her passing. There's no case here. I smirked. So what do you suggest? Langley's voice took on a sly edge. We could ignore it. But personally, he chuckled. I'd rather humiliate her. I grinned. Let's do it. The courtroom was small, barely more than a formality. But I made sure to show up looking like I had already won. Sharp suit, polished demeanor, complete and utter calm. My sister, on the other hand, she looked wrecked. Her hair, once perfectly styled, had lost its luster. Her expensive clothes? Still designer, but not new. And her expression? Tense, desperate, angry. She had spent her last dime on this lawsuit, and she knew it. When the judge finally dismissed her claim as baseless, she didn't even look surprised, just defeated. And as she stormed out of the courthouse, eyes burning with unshed tears, I knew that was the last fight she had left. She had lost everything, and I walked away untouched. My sister's defeat should have been the end of it. But for people like her, losing is never the end. It's just the start of a new scheme. After the lawsuit collapsed, she disappeared for a while. No social media posts, no desperate texts, no phone calls trying to guilt-trip me into a last-minute favor. Just silence. At first, I thought she had finally learned her lesson. That maybe, just maybe, she had accepted her fate and moved on. I was wrong. It started subtly. A few business deals of mine suddenly fell through, no explanation. Calls from real estate investors that were supposed to finalize contracts? They stopped answering. I brushed it off at first, maybe a coincidence, maybe just bad timing, until I got a call from Langley. You're not going to believe this, he said, a mix of irritation and amusement in his voice. Try me, I said, already bracing myself. Your sister's been talking. I sat up. Talking? More like spreading lies. She's been going around to investors, telling them you're involved in fraud, that you bribed your way into the inheritance. She's been planting rumors that you're about to lose everything in legal battles. My grip tightened around the phone. And people are believing her? Langley chuckled. Not the smart ones. But rumors can make people nervous. And in business, nervous people pull out of deals. I exhaled slowly, forcing down the rage bubbling in my chest. So she can't beat me legally, and now she's trying to destroy my reputation? Pretty much, Langley confirmed. But don't worry. I have an idea. A week later, I set the trap. I leaked information through carefully placed sources that I was working on a new investment deal, something big, a high-profile real estate purchase that would be the largest I had ever made. And then I waited. I knew my sister wouldn't be able to resist. She had nothing left except bitterness and spite. If she thought she could ruin me one last time, she'd try. And right on cue, she took the bait. She started running her mouth, telling everyone that my deal was a scam, that I was over-leveraging myself, that I was about to lose everything. Investors hesitated. The market buzzed with speculation. And then, I pulled out of the deal myself. Publicly. Loudly. Making sure everyone knew that I had decided against the investment because of financial concerns in the market. My sister? She thought she had won. Until the real news broke. The deal I had walked away from skyrocketed in value. Suddenly, it was worth millions more than before. Investors who had backed out because of her rumors? They lost out big time. And when they found out who had been spreading the lies, they blacklisted her. Permanently. She had killed her last chance at clawing her way back. And I had barely lifted a finger. 2 weeks later, I saw her for the last time. She wasn't in designer clothes anymore. Her hair wasn't styled to perfection. She didn't walk with the same arrogance that once oozed from her every step. She looked defeated. She didn't even try to speak to me. She just stared, her eyes filled with something I had never seen before. Not anger, not bitterness, regret. And, for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for her. She had dug her own grave, over and over again. And now, she had finally buried herself in it. A full year had passed since my sister's downfall, and in that time, my life had transformed in ways I never imagined. The land my grandmother had left me wasn't just valuable, it was a gold mine. Developers were lining up, throwing offers at my feet, eager to get a piece of the untouched coastline. I had options now, more money than I could ever spend, more opportunities than I had time for. I had built something real, something that would outlast me. And my sister? She had nothing. I didn't go looking for her. I didn't have to. Her name came up every so often, always as a warning, always in hushed voices. She had burned every bridge, ruined every connection. The people who once followed her around like lost puppies now avoided her like a disease. The yacht? Gone. The designer lifestyle? Gone. The fake friends? Gone. She had lost everything, just as quickly as she had stolen it. And for the first time in her life, no one was there to bail her out. I was sitting in my lawyer's office when I got the message. It was short, simple. We need to talk. Please. I stared at my phone for a long moment, debating whether I should respond. I didn't know her anything, not a single second of my time. But something in me, curiosity, maybe made me reply. Why? Please. Just once. In person. I sighed, rubbing my temple. She was desperate. I had known this moment would come. And so, against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, far from the city, far from the world she used to rule. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table, clutching a cup of coffee, like it was the only thing keeping her together. She looked different, not in the way that wealth can change someone, but in the way loss can. Her hair, once always perfectly styled, was now simple and unpolished. The designer clothes were still there, but they weren't new anymore. And her face? It wasn't the face of someone who had simply fallen on hard times. It was the face of someone who had lost everything. I took my time sitting down, watching her carefully. She didn't meet my eyes. She just exhaled shakily, fingers trembling around her cup. You won? The words were so soft, I almost didn't hear them. I tilted my head. Excuse me? She swallowed hard. You won. Okay. She finally looked up at me, her eyes dull, empty. Is that what you wanted to hear? I studied her for a moment, feeling nothing but calm satisfaction. You tell me, I said. You were the one who started this game. She flinched, but I didn't let up. You lied. You manipulated. You stole. You took everything you could from me and laughed about it. I leaned forward slightly. You wanted to win. So tell me, how does it feel now that you've lost? Her breath hitched, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, finally, she broke. I have nothing, she whispered, voice shaking. Nothing. The money's gone. The house is gone. My friends, she laughed bitterly. Turns out they were never really my friends. I just watched her. She sniffed, looking down. I don't know what to do anymore. It was pathetic. Not because she was struggling, but because this was the first time in her life she was facing real consequences. She had spent her entire life thinking she was untouchable, that she could take and take and take and never pay for it. But karma had finally caught up to her, and it was beautiful. She looked at me then, really looked at me. Do you hate me? I let the question hang in the air, rolling it over in my mind. Did I? For a long time, I did. I hated her for what she did to me, for how she betrayed me without a second thought. I hated how she had laughed in my face, how she had celebrated my loss. But now looking at her, broken, defeated, powerless, I realized something. I didn't hate her. I just didn't care about her anymore. And that was worse than hate. I leaned back, crossing my arms. No, I said simply. I don't hate you. Relief flashed across her face, just for a second. And then, but I don't forgive you either. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes flickering with something almost like hope, before it shattered completely. I shook my head. You made your choices. You played your game. And you lost. Her hands clenched into fists. So that's it? I'm just supposed to what? Disappear? I shrugged. That's not my problem. She sucked in a shaky breath, blinking rapidly. And I knew. She wanted me to save her. She wanted me to give her an out, to offer her a lifeline, to fix the mess she had made. But I wouldn't, because she had never done that for me, and because she didn't deserve it. I stood up, tossing a few bills onto the table. She looked up at me, desperation creeping into her eyes. This is the last time I'll ever see you, isn't it? I met her gaze, unflinching. Yes. Her lower lip trembled, but she nodded slowly. She understood. I turned and walked away, feeling lighter than I ever had before. No anger, no resentment, no regret, just freedom, because I had won. And my sister? She had finally learned that some things in life you can never steal back. The day I bought my sister's yacht, the sky was an unbroken stretch of blue, the ocean calm and steady beneath it. There was something poetic about it, like the universe itself had been waiting for this moment as much as I had. The email confirming my purchase came through just after lunch. I opened it with deliberate slowness, savoring every word. Finalized. Ownership transferred. Paid in full. It was mine now. The yacht she had once paraded around like a trophy. The one she had flaunted in my face the day she sold our grandmother's house behind my back. The symbol of her great victory. Now, it was nothing more than another thing she had lost. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly as I stared at the marina through the massive windows of my home. The irony of it all was almost too perfect. My sister had thought she had won everything. The house, the money, the life of luxury she had always craved. And now, she had nothing. And the last remaining piece of her so-called empire? I owned it. A week later, I finally went to see it. The marina was quiet, the air thick with salt, and the distant sound of seagulls. Rows of expensive boats rocked gently against the docks, polished to perfection, waiting for their wealthy owners to take them out for the day. And then there was hers, or rather mine. I walked up the narrow dock, my footsteps steady, unhurried. The yacht was still as sleek and impressive as the day she had bought it, but there were signs of neglect now, water stains along the hull, a faint dullness in the once glossy finish. It had been repossessed months ago, left sitting in limbo until I came along and claimed it for myself. I ran my fingers along the railing, letting the cool metal sink into my skin. I could imagine her standing here once, basking in her stolen wealth, thinking she had won. I imagined the parties, the champagne, the carefully curated social media posts designed to rub her success in my face. All of it was gone now, and it was never coming back. I stepped onto the deck, taking in the space. Everything about it reeked of her. The white leather seating, the over-the-top decor, the little gold-plated nameplate that read Serenity. I let out a soft, amused breath. Serenity. What a joke. My sister had never known peace a day in her life. But I did, and I was about to make sure this yacht finally lived up to its name. The renaming ceremony was small, private. I had no interest in keeping reminders of her on something that now belonged to me. The marina staff removed the old nameplate and replaced it with a new one. Poetic justice, because that's exactly what this was. Pure, undiluted justice. I didn't post about it online. I didn't brag. I didn't need to. She would find out eventually. Someone would mention it to her, or she'd see it docked with its new name, and the realization would hit her like a freight train. The last thing she had held on, the last piece of her short-lived empire, was now under my control, and there wasn't a damn thing she could do about it. I had expected to feel overwhelming triumph, maybe even a rush of adrenaline when I finally took the yacht out on the water for the first time. But instead, what I felt was something far better. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when you know, without a shred of doubt, that you were right all along. That karma had done its job, that every single thing my sister had done to me had come back to her tenfold. And the best part? I had never lifted a finger to destroy her. She had done it all to herself. A month later, I ran into a mutual acquaintance at an event. Someone who had known my sister during her golden days. One of the people who used to hover around her, clinging to the edge of her wealth and status. They hesitated before speaking, as if debating whether to bring her up. Finally, they sighed and said, "Have you heard about her?" I took a sip of my drink. "No," I lied. "What happened?" They shook their head. I don't even know where to start. She's broke. Completely. She tried to start over, but no one will work with her. Her name's ruined in business circles. No one trusts her." I arched a brow. "And the yacht?" A slow, knowing smirk crossed their lips. "Oh, that's the funniest part. She just found out you bought it." I smiled. "And she lost it," they said, laughing. Like, full breakdown. She thought it had been sold to some stranger. When she realized it was you, they shook their head. Let's just say, if she wasn't already rock bottom, that pushed her straight through the floor. I hummed in amusement. Karma's funny like that. They gave me a curious look. "Did you plan all of this?" I met their gaze, calm and collected. "No," I said simply. She planned it for herself, and that was the truth. She had spent her whole life taking, manipulating, and destroying. She had built a world on lies and stolen opportunities. And in the end, it had all collapsed. Because the thing about winning by cheating is that sooner or later, the game catches up to you. And when it did, I was the one left standing. That night, I sat on the deck of my new yacht, staring out at the ocean, the wind cool against my skin. I pulled out the old letter from my grandmother, the one she had written all those years ago. "Some things belong to the ocean, my dear, and some things the ocean can never have." I finally understood. My sister had spent her life chasing something that was never meant to be hers. But me? I had earned this. The house, the land, the money, the peace. I smiled to myself, exhaling slowly as the waves rocked gently beneath me. The game was over, and I had won. For good.